Hey everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us for the second part of our story. Let's jump right back in. Unfortunately, it was my lucky day. Marvin strolled into my office and flopped down in a chair. "So, Jackie boy," he sneered, "hear you're getting a divorce. She catch you screwing the cat." I wasn't about to tell him the real story. "Nah," I said. "Just got tired of her nonsense." "You got a judge yet?" "Yeah, Kagan." Marvin snorted. "That hag? She screwed my boy over. Gave his brother-loving ex the house. The kids. Now Jeff gets to pay for both." Classic Marvin. In just one sentence, he'd insulted two different races. I wondered if he ever talked like this around Jimmy Raines. Jimmy was Marvin's foreman. 6 feet 5 inches, 240 pounds, and built like he could crush a Buick with one hand. He looked intimidating, but after a few beers, the guy was a riot. One night at Mobby's, he decided to mess with some frat boys. Every time one of them got up to use the bathroom, Jimmy followed, arms crossed, and just stared. They all left without ever going in. Zeke, the massive bartender, finally told him to quit scaring the college kids and bought us a pitcher for the entertainment. Jimmy could be hilarious, but I doubted he'd find Marvin's racist tirades all that funny. Luckily, Jimmy saved me from more of Marvin's nonsense that day. He appeared in my doorway, arms crossed. "Marvin, let's go. New guys screwed up the storm drain installation again." Marvin groaned but got up. "Damn fools. Gotta do everything myself." As they left, I silently thanked Jimmy for his impeccable timing. Too bad he wouldn't be able to save me from my date with Judge Kagan 2 weeks later. "What kind of commie pinko nonsense is this?" I snapped, my voice echoing through the courtroom. Judge Sonia Kagan didn't flinch. She just granted my ex-wife's request for couples counseling, and I was one sarcastic comment away from losing it. When I flat out refused, she calmly threatened me with jail. I turned to Bert, my lawyer. "Come on, Bert," I growled. "Tell her therapy's not happening. I just want to be rid of this mess." And the preacher's ex-pals. Bruce slouched in his seat, trying to disappear. Cheryl glared at me like she could set me on fire with a look. If that were possible, I'd be meeting St. Peter already. Bert had subpoenaed Bruce and Cheryl as witnesses. They'd fought it, of course, but after being threatened with contempt charges, they caved. Their congregation, once thriving, had dwindled to 10 clueless holdouts waiting for the next scandal. The 20-member choir was now just Cheryl, Robin, and old man Charles Brown, who looked like he was one hymn away from a coronary. Robin stepped forward, playing her part with a face full of excuses. "It was just sex," she offered weakly. I scoffed. Would she have accepted that excuse if I'd been caught with her best friend Becky? "Jack worked all the time and I felt neglected," she added, as though that somehow explained everything. Neglected? Nonsense. I worked Monday through Friday, 7 to 4. In the past year, I'd been called away exactly 4 times. But there she was, laying it on thick. "Our first time was just curiosity," she admitted. "I'd heard Bruce was, bigger than normal." I rolled my eyes. Classic excuse number 3. Right after, "I felt neglected," and "it was just sex." As Robin droned on, I tuned her out and drifted back to the first time we met. It was at Southern Colorado State's infamous homecoming weekend, where the football game was secondary to the parties, especially Willie Barnes' legendary bonfire bash. Willie was in his mid-40s and still throwing Raegers for drunk college girls. 5 years later, he'd get nailed for assaulting 6 of them. But that weekend, none of us knew or cared. SCS actually won the game, and by 11 p.m., I was buzzed. The parking lot was packed, cars rocking as people hooked up in barns, sheds, and hayfields. I wandered off to take a leak and ended up pissing on the grill of some random car, only to realize midstream that the headlights had just flicked on. Inside, a brunette's head was bobbing in some guy's lap. She looked right at me as I finished up, zipped my pants, and muttered, "Oops, sorry," before walking back to the bonfire. I had just cracked open another beer when I saw her again. Same brunette. She circled the fire, her gaze landing on me. I slipped around the crowd, hoping to avoid being called out as the guy who peed on her boyfriend's car. Unfortunately, some frat boys spotted me first. "Jack, my man!" they hollered, pulling me into bro hugs. Funny thing was, I only knew one of them. As they patted me on the back, I felt a hand brush my hip. The brunette again. She didn't say a word, just smirked and walked off. The next morning, I found a note in my jeans pocket. "If you liked what you saw as much as I liked what I saw, call me. Robin." There was a number scrawled below. I spent the day cleaning up homecoming debris, wondering if the note was legit. By afternoon, curiosity got the better of me and I called. "Hello?" A woman answered. Hi," I said. "May I speak to Robin? She's not here. Can I take a message?" I hesitated. "Yeah, just tell her the guy from the party called. The one who liked what he saw." That evening, my phone rang. A female voice greeted me. "Yeah, I don't know your name, but I've seen your package. Should I just call you Moby Johnny?" I tensed. Crap. Had I just handed my number to the wrong person? "Jack," I said quickly. "Jack's fine. And you're Robin, right?" "Yep. "Want to meet at Frankie's Inn in an hour." I hesitated. Was I walking into a prank? Then I figured, what the hell? "Sure," I said. She described her outfit down to the earrings. I ditched my Broncos jersey in case I needed a fast exit and sat in the cafe, watching the door. 20 minutes later, she walked in, looking exactly as described, and even hotter than I'd imagined. She spotted me, brows furrowing slightly, and made her way over, brushing off a couple of guys who tried to stop her. She sat down with a smirk. "No Broncos jersey?" she teased. "Didn't want to risk a prank," I said with a shrug. "Afraid I'd catfish you?" "More like I wanted a quick escape in case you weren't as advertised." She laughed. "Fair enough." We talked over coffee and pie until closing. A month later, we were official. By then, I was already thinking long-term. I even called Bruce for advice. He gave me some sermon about true love and not breaking hearts. Funny. 10 years later, he helped break mine. I chuckled at the irony, and apparently I did it out loud. Robin and Dr. Landers both stared at me. "Do you find Robin's pain amusing, Mr. Erickson?" "More like my own," I replied, shaking my head. "I owe Gary Wayne an apology." Robin frowned. "Why?" "I never did anything with Gary." True. But she had hooked up with Justin Laurie 2 days after our first date. Rumor had it Gary hadn't exactly measured up to Robin's expectations. "Why would you owe him an apology?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. "Because I punched him for telling the truth." Dr. Landers leaned forward, intrigued. "And what truth was that?" I gave a sardonic smile. "He called Robin Big Bird. Said she was always looking for a bigger limb to perch on." "I don't follow," Landers said, confused. "She's a size queen." Robin's face flushed crimson, her jaw tightening. Silent. Busted. "She dumped Gary because he didn't meet her standards." I continued, my voice sharp. "Then she dumped Justin after one look at me. Now she's got Bruce." I leaned back, letting the disgust settle in the air. "Because his equipment's even bigger." It all felt filthy and stupid, like the punchline to some cruel cosmic joke. "If you're about to tell me it's just sex," I said, "then I'm walking out right now. I'll do my contempt of court jail time, and when I'm out, I'll buy a one-way ticket to Afghanistan, where adulterous witches like her get what they deserve." Robin and Landers stared at me, stunned into silence. Recovering, Landers cleared her throat and turned to Robin. "Now, Robin, we have to acknowledge that some Neanderthal thinking doesn't always comprehend the concept of multiple partners in a loving marriage." My eyes narrowed. "What the hell are you talking about?" "A lot of happily married couples embrace consensual non-monogamy," she explained smoothly. "Some men, understanding they might not be enough for their partners, actually derive satisfaction from allowing them to seek fulfillment with a superior specimen." My brain short-circuited. I'd read about guys like that. Men who willingly took a back seat in their own relationships, letting their wives sleep around while they stayed home, sidelined and humiliated. "There aren't enough pills in the world to make me enjoy that kind of nonsense," I said flatly. "I don't care what kind of pathetic losers get off on that. but it's not for me. No way in hell am I watching my wife get pounded by some other guy, and I'd sooner put a bullet in her head than clean her up afterward. Now, Jack, Landers said, her tone annoyingly calm. Don't you think you owe it to your marriage to be open-minded? No one's saying you have to watch, Robin added with a smug little smirk. Although you could, if you wanted. Yeah, Jack, she purred, leaning closer, her voice thick with mock seduction. It'd be so hot. And afterward, I could even service you. I glared at her. Screw you, you shameless tramp. Robin's grin widened, unbothered. What's the matter? Afraid of a little competition. You think I want Bruce's sloppy seconds? I snapped. What's next? Are you gonna tell me it'd be hot if I wore pink underwear while you and Bruce go at it? Maybe sleep in a cage at the foot of the bed. Robin tilted her head thoughtfully, then smirked. Oh no, Jack, she said sweetly. We'd let you sleep in your own bed. That was it. I shot to my feet. I'm done. I'm out. The receptionist at the front desk glanced up nervously, her hand hovering near the phone. I could tell she was ready to dial 911 at any second. Mr. Erickson, Landers said sharply, you were court-ordered to attend these sessions. Walk out now, and you'll face jail time for contempt. I turned back and glared at her, my temper barely in check. I've been here an hour. Tell that black-robed hag on the bench whatever you want. I don't give a damn. It'll be a cold day in hell before I ever set foot in this place again. I jabbed a finger in Robin's direction. And I'll be having a little chat with my lawyers about getting your license pulled, you psychotic fraud. I stormed out of the office, feeling better than I had in months. When I barged into Bert's office, his face fell immediately. Tell me you didn't kill anyone, he sighed. I wish, I muttered. But no, I sighed heavily. I probably said some things they won't like, though. I explained everything, the setup, the bias counselor, how rehearsed the whole charade had felt. Bert nodded grimly. You're not the first to complain, Jack. But every complaint against Landers gets buried. He sighed. I'd have warned you, but that would have been considered tampering. Well, I'm not going back, I said firmly. That Jabba the Hutt-looking judge can jail me if she wants. But I'm not sitting through 3 more hours of that garbage. Bert rubbed his temples. All right, I'll have David Crosby make some calls. Just stay out of trouble, Jack. We'll get this sorted. Later that evening, I cracked open a beer and flipped aimlessly between Jerry Springer reruns and pro wrestling. Living the high life, obviously. By the time the ballgame came on, I was just the right amount of buzzed. Then I heard the thunder. Stepping outside, I saw dark storm clouds rolling in over downtown. The air was thick with that eerie, electric chill that always comes before a nasty summer hailstorm. A few minutes later, my phone rang. But it wasn't about the hail. It was flooding. My crew and I spent the entire night hauling sandbags and clearing debris. By 4 a.m., the river was threatening the dikes and the Lime Road Bridge. The Army Corps of Engineers insisted the dike was stable. The county claimed the bridge was sound. While they debated, we got to work. By 9 a.m. Friday, I finally pulled into my driveway, dead on my feet. There was no chance of catching my wife with Bruce this time. Mostly because I didn't have a wife anymore. And I didn't give a damn whose Johnny she was riding. Running on a cocktail of stale coffee and NOS energy drinks, I decided a shot of Jägermeister would knock me out. I downed the bottle and crashed on the couch. I woke to the sound of knocking. Groggy, I checked my phone. 11 p.m. When I peeked outside, I saw Brenda McBain standing on my porch, shifting her weight nervously. What the hell does she want? I opened the door. Sorry to bother you, Jack, she said, her voice uncertain. But there's something I think you need to see. It might help with your divorce. I hesitated. What could she possibly have to show me? Then, for the first time, I really noticed her eyes, striking gray, sharp, and watchful. She said something I didn't catch and started walking toward her car. Even running on autopilot, I understood. I was supposed to follow her. Without a word, I slid into the passenger seat. We drove in tense silence, the air thick with unspoken thoughts. I found my gaze drifting toward Brenda's legs, long-toned and impossible to ignore. She caught me looking and tilted her head, her smirk deepening into something both knowing and amused. Brenda pulled off the main road and into the deserted parking lot of an old, abandoned power plant. The city had bought the surrounding buildings years ago, but every plan to redevelop the site had been mysteriously stalled by the city board. No one could ever explain why. Oddly enough, despite the stagnation, the city had spent a fortune upgrading the site's security. 2 years back, they'd even erected a 10-foot chain-link fence around the perimeter. As we pulled to a stop, a sense of unease stirred in my chest. There were too many cars. Something wasn't right. "Brenda," I said cautiously, "why are we here? If we get caught, this could be serious trouble." "Just trust me," she replied, slipping out of the driver's seat. "This is going to help you." I hesitated but followed. I still didn't see how breaking and entering was supposed to assist with my divorce, but curiosity and desperation had the better of me. Brenda led me through a cut section in the fence, weaving silently toward the crumbling King James Hotel nearby. When we reached a basement window, I noticed a thin strip of light seeping through the dusty glass. I frowned. That didn't make sense. The power to this place had been cut off years ago. I crouched down and peered inside. One glimpse was all it took to freeze me in place. Brenda handed me a camcorder, her expression serious now. On the drive back, she explained everything. How she and her brother Tommy had been tailing Bruce and Robin for weeks. How they'd overheard whispered conversations about this place. How they'd followed them here and uncovered something much, much bigger than a simple affair. I nodded slowly, processing it all. "So, choir practice is just a cover?" Brenda looked embarrassed but nodded. "Don't worry," she added quickly. "You and Tommy aren't part of this." We drove on in silence until she suddenly blurted, "The only reason Tommy and I, is because no one else wants us." I hadn't brought up their incest. "That's not true," I said, though the words felt hollow even as I said them. She shook her head bitterly. "Maybe some guys would use me, but no one wants to be seen with me." "I hear the jokes, Jack." I stayed quiet, unsure of how to respond. "They call me Butterface," she continued softly. "Great body, Butterface. And a 3-bagger. I winced. "Yeah," she added with a laugh that had no humor in it. "1 bag for my head, 1 for his in case mine falls off, and a 3rd bag at the door just in case someone walks in." I felt sick. "I'm good enough for sex in the dark," she murmured, "but not to be dated." "Brenda, come on," I said, forcing conviction into my voice. "If I were your age, I'd be all over you." A total lie, but at that moment, it was the only thing I could think of to ease her pain. It worked. Her eyes softened, and the tension in her shoulders eased. "You've helped me out big time," I added. "Let me return the favor. Dinner tomorrow. Get dolled up, and I'll pick you up at 7. She hesitated, her face unreadable. "I'm going to Denver tomorrow," she finally said. "I won't be back until Sunday." "No problem. Rain check." A small smile curved her lips. "Deal." I stepped out of the car and walked inside, a sense of calm settling over me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had the upper hand. The next morning, I made a few calls. By Thursday, everything was in motion. My first call was to Bert. "This could technically be considered extortion," he sighed, after I filled him in. "But honestly, I think it'll work. No wonder that which gets away with everything." My next call was to Mike Starr, an old friend from high school who'd become an investigative journalist. I handed him the footage and gave him all the sordid details. "I've heard rumors about this," he admitted. "They meet on Wednesdays, too." "So what's the plan?" I asked. He grinned. "I'll stake out the hotel and bust them live on TV." Perfect. Monday morning, I walked into the city maintenance director's office with a proposal. One that would solve a storage issue and, conveniently, block off access to the King James Hotel. He loved it. Since the city owned the land, all we had to do was rezone it. No budget requests. No city board interference. As I was leaving, he stopped me. "Jack, I'm recommending you for a promotion." You just saved us $500,000. By Wednesday, approvals were in place. I was put in charge, overseeing a 10-man crew and a 3-week timeline. Thursday morning, we started moving fencing material to the old power plant. At noon, I left for my counseling session with Dr. Landers. I walked in early. The receptionist gave me a withering glare before buzzing me through. Dr. Landers sat behind her desk, looking smug as ever. "Mr. Erickson," she said, arching an eyebrow. "I'm surprised to see you here. Early even. One-on-one sessions are new for you." Huh. I crossed my arms. "I'm done with this sham. Not coming back. Not paying for it." Her smirk widened. "Judge Kagan ordered these sessions, Jack. If you refuse—" "Screw you," I interrupted coldly. "Choke on the biggest piece." Her eyes narrowed. "You're going to call Kagan," I said, "and tell her the gig is up. I know about your little spouse-swapping club at the King James." Her face drained of color. "I'm sure the legal and ethics boards will love hearing how a family court judge and a marriage counselor run a secret sex club. Especially when all the cheating wives just happen to win in Kagan's court while their non-member husbands get screwed. There is no such." "Shut up, witch. I saw you. I saw them. I saw the elk head with condoms on its antlers." She turned ghost white. Mike Starr already had the footage, and he knew exactly who'd been blocking the property sales all these years. Kagan and her husband were about to lose everything. I turned at the door. "Screw you," I said, and walked out. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. A knot tightened in my stomach as the door to Dr. Landers' office buzzed open. Jack should have been here 10 minutes ago. Bruce and my attorney, Justin Bieber, yes, that was actually his name, had assured me that Landers and Kagan would either talk Jack into reconsidering or stall him long enough for him to give up. I had dressed carefully, with intention. A shorter skirt, no stockings, my hair styled the way he used to like, and the same perfume I wore on our last anniversary. But Jack was nowhere in sight. Dr. Landers looked visibly unsettled, which I misread at first as a personal emergency. Maybe she had to cancel last minute. Disappointment hit me hard. As much as I dreaded the weight of Jack's resentment, I still wanted to see him. I missed him in ways I couldn't admit, even to myself. I wasn't even allowed near our old house anymore. Couldn't stand on the balcony if he was home. Is Jack really willing to risk contempt charges just to avoid this session? I asked, more to break the silence than anything else. Landers hesitated before answering. "There's no session today, Robin. I'll call you later." She unlocked the door, gesturing for me to leave. As I stepped out, I glanced back and caught her expression. Rattled, shaken, like someone who had seen a ghost. I suddenly had unexpected free time on my hands, so I drove to the church, eager for tomorrow's private gathering. Bruce and Terry Kagan were both supposed to be there, and I had plans to try something new. Just thinking about it had me trembling with anticipation. But when I arrived, Bruce was on the phone, pacing, looking furious. "That was Terry," he muttered, rubbing his forehead. "The club's off tonight. Jack knows everything." My stomach dropped. "He's threatening to go public with his friend, Mike Starr," Bruce continued, jaw tightening. "If this leaks, a lot of people are going down." He exhaled sharply and then, with a coldness I had never heard from him before, said, "You know what? I'm starting to regret getting involved with you, Robin. You're not worth all this trouble." I froze. Just a few months ago, he couldn't get enough of me. He was constantly comparing me to Cheryl, always praising me, always putting me above her. And now, just because Jack was fighting back, I was disposable? That evening, after dinner, my lawyer called. "The hearing's been moved up," he said. "What? Why?" "The only time I've seen a judge rush a hearing like this is when the petitioner withdraws their divorce request." "Could Jack be facing contempt charges?" "Doubtful," Bieber said. "If that were the case, we'd have been summoned too. Just get some rest. I've got a good feeling about tomorrow." Bruce's mood lifted when he heard the news. Maybe someone had leaned on Jack, pressured him into backing down. There were powerful figures caught up in this, and while Jack had guts, he didn't have real influence, or so we thought. That night, the sex was incredible. I lost track of how many times I came. Bruce, Cheryl, and I spent an unforgettable night together. By 10 the next morning, I was seated in Judge Kagan's courtroom. Jack wasn't there, but his lawyer was, and he wasn't alone. Another man, unfamiliar but commanding, stood beside him. Will Jack face any consequences for not showing up? I whispered to Justin. Unlikely, he muttered, his eyes narrowing on the stranger. But something's up. That's Graham Nash. He hasn't set foot in a courtroom in years. Before I could ask what that meant, Judge Kagan entered and called the court to order. Jack's lawyer, Nash, and Justin approached the bench and whispered among themselves for nearly 20 minutes. When Justin finally returned to my side, his face was troubled. What's happening? I asked. Before he could answer, the gavel struck. In 90 days, the marriage of Jack and Robin Erickson will be officially dissolved, Kagan announced. Robin Erickson will receive no spousal support. Mr. Erickson will transfer 25% of his retirement funds and 40% of their liquid assets to her. I turned to Justin, stunned. What just happened? Kagan granted Jack's petition, he muttered grimly. The next thing I knew, I was regaining consciousness with an EMT studying me. Within 3 weeks, everything fell apart. The Spouse Swappers Club exploded in the media. Judge Kagan was removed from the bench, and her husband was charged with pill trafficking. Justin Bieber? Disbarred. Turned out he'd been secretly sleeping with male clients and deliberately sabotaging cases for Kagan. He was also linked to a high school pill ring. Dr. Landers? Ordered to refund her patients. A few days later, she was found dead in her bathtub, wrists slit. Her husband was slumped over the toilet with a gunshot wound to the head. Bruce lost his ministry. His severance barely covered relocating. Cheryl, tired of his insatiable sex drive, divorced him after catching him pleasuring himself while spying on their neighbors. He blamed me for everything, then left without a backward glance. With nowhere else to go, I moved into a tiny apartment with Cheryl while we both tried to rebuild our lives. Most of my divorce settlement went to setting up utilities and hiring her a decent lawyer. Bruce, desperate and out of options, tried to hire Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young for legal representation. They refused. He ended up with a no-name attorney from a classified ad. Cheryl obliterated him in court. Last I heard, he was preaching somewhere in Iowa. After my divorce was finalized, I got a job at an accounting firm. Cheryl found work with a contractor and eventually started dating one of his employees. I didn't date. I wanted Jack. Sometimes I'd walk past our old house, hoping to see him. One day, I saw a sold sign out front. It shattered me. That night, I drowned my sorrow in Häagen-Dazs and Chips Ahoy. Then, in the frozen food aisle at the grocery store, I saw him, Jack. He was reaching for a frozen pizza. Before I knew what I was doing, I was on my knees, sobbing, pleading with him right there in the middle of the store. I don't even remember what I said. But when I finally looked up, Jack was staring at me, clearly uncomfortable. A small crowd had gathered. He smirked, pointed at his backside, and said, "Eat my dust and die." Then he walked away. Las Vegas, Nevada. 4 years later, I pulled into my driveway, eyeing the overgrown lawn. I'd mow it Saturday morning, before the desert heat kicked in. The door had barely shut behind me when my wife's arms wrapped around my neck, her lips pressing against mine. "Hey, baby," Brenda murmured. "Did you keep the tourists from scamming the slot machines today?" I chuckled. "Same old Brenda. And next month, when you graduate," I said, pulling her closer, "you'll be slaving for the man too. At least until you knock me up." Brenda teased, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Studying tonight?" I asked. "Yeah, but I gotta watch Samantha around you," she said with a smirk. "She can't stop staring at your ass." I laughed. "Had a neighbor like that once, always watching me mow the lawn. Especially Robin," Brenda added, shaking her head. "Her loss. My gain," I said, pulling her closer. "Damn right," she replied. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. "I'll pick up a couple of pizzas. You college girls eat like linebackers." She kissed me again before I left. We'd been married 3 years. I'd arrived in Vegas just 3 days after leaving Stonemore. Some people might think I'm a jerk for ditching Robin at that rundown motel in Casper, Wyoming, but I don't care. I'd never trust that cheating witch again. She was barely asleep when I slipped out, paid for 3 nights, and disappeared. By sunrise, I was already deep into Utah. 2 days later, I rolled into Vegas. Within a week, I had a job and an apartment. I sold the house, cashed out my retirement, and bought a new place. 2 weeks later, Brenda showed up. She'd already enrolled at UNLV and moved in with me while waiting for my house sale to finalize. At first, she'd just check in, bring food, watch movies, go out on weekends. But the more time we spent together, the more I liked her. And the best part? I wasn't ashamed to be seen with her. When I told her about Robin groveling in the grocery store, Brenda teared up. "Hey," I said, taking her hands. "I have no plans to go back to her." "Good," she whispered, sniffling. "Brenda, I'm falling for you," I admitted. "If you can stand being with an old guy like me." Before I could finish, she jumped on me, kissing me like her life depended on it. That night, after 3 rounds, the first fevered and frantic, the next too slow and tender, I told her my plan. I expected her parents, Tom and Jerry, to flip out. Instead, Tom just nodded. "Jack," he said, "you've always been a little rough around the edges, but I can't imagine our daughter in better hands." I froze. "Daughter?" Jerry grinned. Turns out Brenda had been their daughter all along. A year after we moved to Vegas, Brenda revamped her look. She learned new makeup techniques, changed her hair. She'd always been pretty, but now, she glowed. We got married after her freshman year. "If you ever meet a guy your age, I'll understand," I told her once. She ignored me for a week. Then, out of nowhere, she stormed up, grabbed my face and said, "You stupid a hole. I've only ever had eyes for one man." She kissed me hard. "I watched the wrong woman throw you away, and I'll be damned if I let you go." I still keep in touch with people back home. Cheryl married a tile contractor and moved to California. Robin, she crawled back to Stonemore 2 years after I left her in Wyoming. She married a rancher, but that didn't last. A year later, he caught her in bed with 3 of his ranch hands. He booted her on the spot. Figures. The pimply-faced kid at the pizza counter handed me my order. I paid and hurried home. If I got there fast enough, Brenda would probably jump me before her study group arrived. Me? I'd retreat to my den, kick back, and watch the Rockies on my MLB pass. From one risky woman to another, my life had finally smoothed out, like a well-oiled machine ticking quietly in the morning light.